Debunked. The hard problem of consciousness refers to the challenge of explaining why and how a physical process in the brain gives rise to subjective experiences, or qualia. Now, the entire framing of this so-called problem is based on the fallacy of begging the question. It assumes the conclusion of the mind-body distinction in Cartesian dualism. So the actual hard problem of consciousness is reversed. It's for the mystic or spiritualist or believer in the immaterial or supernatural realm or the immaterial self or essence or soul or ghost in the machine. How can this entity affect a material or physical brain? Specifically, how can an immaterial essence or property or entity affect a material or physical brain and body? So how is this ghost in the machine? What levers is it pulling? What hands is it using to pull levers? How does it even, a physical ghost, affect a lever or move a lever or anything? And of course, from another chapter from this book, I've already demonstrated that at this conscious self or ghost in the machine is not the body, then what senses, if it just uses the physical senses of the body, the sense stimulus, then how exactly does this ghost in the machine see, hear, smell, or touch anything when it's disembodied? And when it is in the body, what hands is it using to pull the levers of the physical body? Because we know that only material causes can have an effect on material. So the so-called hard problem essentially seeks to explain something that isn't there. It's just a logical fallacy begging its own conclusion, circular argument. In reality, it's quite simple. There is no problem. However, there is a hard problem that exists in metaphysics. As an example, to demonstrate the absurdity of the hard problem or the logical fallacy, how about this hard problem? Why, when we see rainbows, have we never found the pot of gold? Is this evidence that leprechauns have supernatural properties that evade our current testing method? Or is it possible that this flawed assumption is not a hard problem, but rather an impossible problem when you're searching for evidence of something that doesn't exist? The hard problem is a logical fallacy, simply put, begging the question. And qualia just explains how the self or consciousness is actually created by the physical brain and the sense stimulus. So qualia is known as the transformation from sensory stimulus to experience, and it involves several steps. One, detection, where sensory receptors detect the stimuli, the light hitting the retina. Then there's a signal transmission, where the receptor converts the stimuli into electrical signals, which travel through neurons to the brain, through the nervous system. And processing, where the brain processes these signals in various regions, integrating them to form a coherent perception or experience. Again, if you look into the anatta section, anatta, no self upload, on consciousness as an illusion, you'll see that all of our various sense perceptions are, as the Buddha's skandhas, or the 5 aggregates, or the 5 khandhas, argue that all consciousness or self is not real. It's just a bundling of various impermanent, fleeting sense stimulus. So what we refer to as consciousness or the soul is nothing more than the experiences or qualia generated by the brain as it processes and represents sense stimulus. There's no user of the TV. Rather, data is transmitted via electrical signals to each pixel. So I use the analogy of a television. So there's no watcher or there's no third entity watching the TV. There's just data transmitted through electrical signals to each pixel, creating the visual image or representation displayed on the screen. This is equivalent to qualia, or conscious experience. That representation, or that representation that's displayed on the TV show is essentially the qualia, or conscious experience. And you are simply this process, what we call the thinker or the self. Some argue the TV has no qualia, only the conscious human that experiences the TV or watches the TV, the third person. But they assert that the soul is what experiences qualia from the human body, and not the body being conscious by itself. So the human body is akin to a TV, necessitating a conscious agent observing the screen for a subjective experience to occur. But this argument is easily refuted with a straightforward question. When is this soul or self or eternal consciousness ever outside the body, watching and hearing the body? And what sensory organs, such as eyes or ears, does this disembodied soul possess that would allow it to watch the body? Again, what eyes is it using to watch the body? These inquiries, these questions expose the original argument's reliance on logical fallacy, specifically begging the question, false equivalence. So the conclusion here, what we call consciousness or the self or soul, is derived. It's actually just the functioning of the brain. And it can be demonstrated by testable and repeatable evidence that, one, every night when we enter deep sleep, not dreaming, not awake, but in deep sleep, the self or the soul or consciousness or the I doesn't exist. There are no sensory experiences, there's no qualia, there's no willful responses, there's no memory, nothing, no you. And every time someone's knocked out or choked out or passes out, they lose consciousness. Again, there's no sensory experiences, there's no qualia, no willful responses, and no memory. A doctor can use general aesthetics to induce unconsciousness. In this state, there's no sensory experiences, no qualia, no willful responses, no memory. Again, some people, you can read, some people, they didn't get the correct dosage of anesthetics, and therefore they have some experience during this. But this is just based on the random lack of enough anesthetics. This is just a fluke, and actually a further demonstration that when enough anesthetics are used, there is no self, no experience at all. And only when not enough is used is there this sensory experience. Drugs and alcohol are chemicals, obviously, that affect the brain and thus affect our conscious experience. Our sensory, our responses, and our memory. So also brain damage physically alters or removes certain conscious experiences like imagination, memory, and motor skills, or the will to move, the self that is supposedly the ghost in the machine, deciding, making the decisions. Brain damage can alter that. Alzheimer's disease also, alters personality traits and memory. So these multiple angles demonstrate that what we refer to as consciousness, the self, the soul, the I, is not a permanent foundation residing inside the body as the driver or ghost in the machine. It's just an impermanent, fleeting, transient derivative of the functioning brain. This delusion of the brain constitutes a narrative or a story that we create from the sensory experiences of this physical body. So basically you, the I, the self, the soul, consciousness, is just a narrative that we tell ourselves, that we tell, the body tells itself, or the functioning brain tells itself. And again, if you listen to the memory problem of consciousness, you'll see how without the memory of past experiences, which is just sensory stimulus that the brain combines and calls an experience, without those past experiences, quote unquote, if you didn't remember those, you would have no concept of this permanent or continuation of a self or so forth. So